The letter arrived on a Thursday, and Mira Blackwell read it twice before she understood what it meant. She was standing at the compositing table in the back room of her father-in-law's print shop on Cordwainer Street, her fingers stained with ink to the second knuckle. A tray of movable type balanced in the crook of her left arm. The shop smelled the way it always smelled: hot metal, linseed oil, the faint sourness of damp paper drying on the lines overhead. Her father-in-law, old Mr. Blackwell, had gone to the bank that morning and had not come back, and she had been running the press herself since noon, which was not unusual. She had been running it in one way or another for 3 years. The solicitor's clerk had come at 2:30. He had handed her the envelope without meeting her eyes, which was the first sign that something was wrong. The second sign was the seal. Not a private seal, a ducal seal. A stag above a coronet pressed into dark red wax. She set the tray of type down carefully before she broke it. The letter was 3 paragraphs. The first informed her that her late husband, Thomas Blackwell, had died indebted to the estate of Aldrich Voss, Earl of Dunmore, to the sum of £460, a debt incurred by means of a promissory note signed 18 months before Thomas had died of fever on the road to Edinburgh. The second paragraph explained that this debt had passed, upon Thomas's death, to his nearest surviving heir. His father, who had, it appeared, signed his interest over to Mira in the settlement of his own affairs last autumn, a document she had witnessed and not fully read. The third paragraph informed her, in the flat, careful language of men paid to deliver bad news cleanly, that the Earl of Dunmore required settlement of this debt within 30 days, and that in lieu of payment he was prepared to offer an alternative arrangement, the details of which would be discussed in person should she present herself at Dunmore House on Friday morning. Mira read it a second time. Then she set it on the compositing table and pressed her inked hands flat on the surface and stood very still for a moment, listening to the press thump steadily behind her. £460. The shop turned £60 in a good month. Thomas had been dead for 14 months. She had spent 11 of them paying down his other debts, the ones she had known about, the ones catalogued in the ledger she had found in his desk drawer the week after the funeral. A document that had taught her more about her marriage than 3 years of living inside it. She had sold the horse, the good china, 2 paintings she had not liked anyway, and had kept the press running 6 days a week. Because the press was the one thing Thomas had not managed to ruin, because the press had been hers to run from the beginning. She had not known about the promissory note. She stood there until the press ran out of ink, and the thumping stopped, and then she cleaned her hands, folded the letter, and put it in her apron pocket. Friday morning she presented herself at Dunmore House. The house sat at the end of a long gravel drive on the north edge of the county, a wide limestone building with dark windows and a garden that had been laid out with military precision. The hedges were squared to the inch. The gravel was raked. Not a leaf had been permitted to settle anywhere it had not been placed. Mira stood at the front door and thought of the print shop with its ink-stained floors and the paper hanging in long pale lines from the drying racks, and felt for a moment the specific loneliness of being very out of place. A steward admitted her. His name was Fenn, and he moved with the unhurried exactness of a man who had been organising other people's days for 30 years, and had strong opinions about the correct order of things. She was shown to a sitting room and left there with a cup of tea she did not drink. When the door opened again, the man who came through it was not what she had expected. She had expected someone old. The name Aldrich Voss, Earl of Dunmore, had conjured in her mind a man of her father-in-law's generation. Heavy, settled, confident in the way that men with titles and acres usually were confident, which was to say, without examination. He was perhaps 35. He was tall in the way that filled a doorframe, and he moved with a cane he did not seem to need, holding it loosely in his left hand, the tip barely touching the floor. His face was angular and still, and his eyes, when they settled on her, were the colour of river water in November, pale grey, clear, and unexpectedly direct. He stopped inside the door. He did not sit, Mrs. Blackwell. His voice was low and controlled, the voice of a man who was accustomed to speaking in rooms where other people listened. She stood because sitting felt like a concession she had not decided to make. "My lord," he looked at her for a moment, with an expression she could not immediately name. Not the appraising look she had prepared herself for, not calculation or dismissal, or the faint, comfortable condescension men sometimes wore when dealing with women they believed were frightened. Something more careful than that, more considered. "You ran your late husband's press," he said. "It was not a question." "I run my press," she said. "My name is on the license." Something shifted in his face, almost imperceptible, a slight adjustment the way a scale shifts when a weight is added. He sat then opposite her and set the cane across his knees. "The arrangement I have in mind," he said, "is not what you are expecting." She said nothing. She had learned, in 3 years of managing creditors on behalf of a husband who hid from them in the back room, that silence was frequently more useful than speaking. He looked at the window. The grey light caught the line of his jaw, the tension there, the muscle working beneath the skin. "I require a wife," he said. "Specifically, I require a wife who is capable of reading legal correspondence, identifying irregularities in printed documents, and presenting herself in public without revealing what she knows. The debt your husband contracted with my estate was," his voice paused, a slight, careful pause, calibrated, a matter I should have pursued more vigorously at the time. "I did not for reasons I will explain. I am explaining them now because the situation has become urgent, and because you are, as far as I have been able to determine, the only person in this county who can help me." Mira looked at him, at the cane resting across his knees, at his hands which were still. She said, "Help you with what exactly?" He said, "My brother's murder." The sitting room was very quiet. Somewhere outside, a crow called once and fell silent. Owen Voss had been 24 years old when he died 18 months ago on a wet road north of the county town. The official account was a carriage accident, a broken axle, a ditch, the kind of senseless misfortune that happened on country roads in autumn. The coroner had ruled it accidental. The file had been closed. The family had buried Owen in the churchyard at Dunmore Parish, and Aldrich had worn black for the prescribed period, and the county had expressed its condolences and moved on. Except that 3 weeks before Owen died, he had come to his brother with a document. A lease agreement, he had said, found in the estate office, a lease agreement for a parcel of Dunmore land that bore a signature Aldrich did not recognise, authorising the transfer of mineral rights to a private company Owen could not identify. The signature appeared at a glance to be Aldrich's. It was not. Owen had been certain. He had been about to take it to a solicitor when the carriage had gone off the road. The document had vanished from the estate office before Aldrich could retrieve it. He had spent 18 months trying to reconstruct it. 18 months suspecting a woman named Cecily Rathmore, a widow with copper hair and a smile like a locked door, who had been orbiting the Dunmore estate for 2 years, and who had, in the weeks following Owen's death, begun making overtures through a solicitor about a prior agreement between their families. A betrothal contract, she claimed, predating any current arrangement. There was no betrothal contract. Aldrich was certain of this the way he was certain of very little else. Because he had spent his entire adult life reading documents for accuracy, and a man who could identify a forged surveyor's report at 40 paces did not misplace his own contractual history. He had also spent 18 months managing the specific problem of being a man who suspected he knew who had arranged his brother's death and could prove none of it. The cane, Mira understood by the end of the first conversation, was not a physical necessity. It was a management strategy. Aldrich Voss had been, before Owen's death, an active man by every account she would later gather, riding, managing his own estate, attending sessions in town. After Owen died, he had developed what the county understood to be a lingering injury to his right knee, the aftermath of a fall he had not, in fact, taken. The cane slowed him. It changed the way people looked at him. It had kept Cecily Rathmore from running, because a man diminished by injury was a man worth managing rather than fleeing. He needed a wife before Cecily's fabricated betrothal contract could be presented to a magistrate. He needed a wife who could read, who understood legal documents well enough to identify forgeries, who had some demonstrable reason to accept the arrangement, without the luxury of lengthy deliberation. He had found, through a solicitor whose discretion he trusted, a widow with ink-stained hands, an intimate knowledge of printed documents, and a debt she could not pay. Thomas, Mira thought, sitting very still in a chair in a house that did not belong to her. Even dead, Thomas had managed to arrange things to his convenience. She married the Earl of Dunmore on the Tuesday of the following week, in the small chapel attached to the house, with Fenn and a housemaid named Blythe as witnesses, and an elderly great-aunt of Aldrich's, named Lady Orrin Voss, who sat in the front pew in dark green wool and watched Mira with the attentive, undeceived gaze of a woman who had seen most things and was reserving judgment on this one. The ceremony was short. Aldrich spoke his vows to a point 2 inches left of her face, which was something she noticed without yet knowing what to do with. He placed the ring with his eyes down. His hand found hers without fumbling in a way that struck her, later, as precise. Afterward, he showed her to a set of rooms in the east wing, well-appointed, recently prepared, with a desk beneath the window already stocked with ink and paper. She stood in the middle of the room and looked at the desk, and understood that she had not been brought here to be decorative. That evening, dinner was formal and almost entirely silent. The table was long enough to lose a conversation in, and Aldrich sat at one end with his eyes pointed at the middle distance and his cane propped against his chair, and Mira sat at the other end and watched him cut his meat with the mechanical precision of a man going through practiced motions, and she thought about the ring and the 2 inches left of her face, and filed both things in the part of her mind where she kept information that did not yet make sense. She found the library that night because she could not sleep, and the sound of the house settling was strange, and she was not accustomed to rooms that did not smell of ink. The library was dark except for the fire, and she had not expected anyone to be in it, and so she was not prepared for what she found. He was standing before the fireplace with a small portrait in both hands, his back to the door, the cane leaning abandoned against the mantelpiece. His shoulders were drawn in, his head was low, and in the glass of the portrait she could see the reflection of his face. And his face, stripped of the measured control she had watched all evening, was something she had not expected. The grief on it was the kind that is not performed, the kind that surfaces only when a person believes they are entirely unwatched. The young man in the portrait was fair-haired and open-faced, and obviously unmistakably related. Mira took one step backward, and the floorboard gave her away. He turned. The mask came back so fast it was like watching a door close, smooth total, leaving no seam. He set the portrait face down on the mantelpiece. His hand rested on it for one moment. "Forgive me," he said. "I was under the impression I was alone." "I came for a book," she said. "Take one." She did not move. After a moment she said, "Is that your brother?" He looked at the fire for a moment without answering. Then he said, "Yes," and his voice was level and his face was level, and nothing in either of them gave way, and somehow that control, in a man she had watched hold a portrait in the dark with wet eyes, was the most revealing thing she had seen since she arrived. He handed her a ledger from the desk and asked her to read the land survey figures aloud. And she did, and when she found the discrepancy in the eastern boundary, a measurement that did not match the original deed she had read in the solicitor's office the week before, she said so, and he went very still. "You read the original deed. I read everything I sign. I always have." His eyes, when they came to her face, were careful and assessing, and something else she could not name. He said, "There is a contract in the third drawer that I have been unable to authenticate. Would you look at it?" She looked at it. She looked at 3 more after that. By the time the hall clock struck 10, she had identified 2 inconsistencies in the mineral rights lease. The typographic spacing was wrong in the signature block, the kind of error a compositor made when setting unfamiliar text in a hurry, the kind of error she would have corrected without thinking in the print shop. And she had told him so, and he had listened to her with the attention of a man who has found something he was not sure he was going to find, recalibrating as she spoke. A message arrived on a silver tray. Fenn's face, delivering it, had gone to stone. "Cecily Rathmore," he read, "requests permission to call at Dunmore House. She states she holds a prior contractual claim." Aldrich set the paper down. His hands, for just a moment, were not entirely steady. "Let her come," he said. Fenn withdrew. Aldrich set Cecily's message beside the face-down portrait of his brother, and did not speak further, and Mira understood that the evening was finished. She went upstairs and sat at the writing desk in her room and thought about what she knew. A dead brother, a forged document, a man who moved through door frames without his cane touching them. a ring placed with the precision of a man who could see exactly where her hand was. A woman arriving to claim a contract that did not exist. She pressed her palms flat on the desk and felt something she had not felt in a long time, not fear, not confusion. Something sharper and colder and more deliberate. Purpose. The weeks that followed established a pattern. During the day, Aldrich kept to his performance, the cane, the careful movements, the faint hesitation that the county had come to associate with his injury. In the evenings, when the staff retired and the doors were closed, the cane went in the corner, and the man she had married became a different version of himself, or perhaps the truer one, moving through the library with the easy authority of someone who could see exactly where everything was. She sat beside him and they read documents together, estate records, correspondence, a set of company ledgers Fenn had obtained from the county registry. She was aware, in those evenings, of the adjustment required, the specific strangeness of sitting across from a man who was looking directly at her face after days of watching him look at walls. She lost her place in documents when his eyes settled on her. She was conscious of small things she had not been conscious of before, the angle of lamplight on the page, the way she tucked her hair back when she was concentrating, the expression she made when she found an error, which was apparently evident enough for him to say, the third evening, without looking up from the ledger, "You've found something." She had. She always had. One evening, he showed her the betrothal document Cecily had sent to his solicitor. Mira held it under the lamp and looked at it for 30 seconds. Then she turned it 45 degrees and looked at it again. This was set in a compositing shop, she said. Whoever produced this document had a compositor lay the type for the body text, and then had someone write over the signature block by hand. Look at the kerning here. The space between the letters in the body is mechanical. The space in the signature is not. And this, she pointed to a letter in the middle of the block. This is an old-style longs that nobody under 60 uses. Someone set this body text from an older document and added the names and date by hand afterward. She paused. "I know this typeface," she said. "I have a copy of this font in the shop. It came to us in a lot of old equipment 3 years ago. We were the only shop in the county who had it." Aldrich looked at her. "Are you certain? I set 2,000 words a week in this font for 18 months. I would know it in the dark." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said quietly, "Aldrich, I believe we have moved past my lord." She looked up from the document. He was watching her with an expression she had not seen on his face before, not in the library, not over the estate papers, not even in the moment she had caught him with his brother's portrait. It was the expression of a man who had been very carefully not hoping for something, and had just been given it anyway. She nodded, and looked back at the document, and the room felt different than it had a few minutes before. They worked into the following weeks. Aldrich brought in a solicitor from the city, a quiet man named Mr. Pruitt, who wore wire-rimmed spectacles and left ink on everything he touched and was, Mira discovered, entirely trustworthy. They assembled the evidence across the library table. The forged betrothal contract, the typographic analysis, the mineral rights lease, and the reconstruction, painstaking and complete, that Mira produced from memory because she had read the original deed in the solicitor's office, and her memory, once applied to a printed document, did not let things go. Aldrich's great-aunt, Lady Orrin, missed none of it. She occupied the morning room most days, ostensibly working on a piece of needlework that seemed never to make visible progress, and her eyes, behind it, catalogued everything. She watched Aldrich's cane, and where it went in the evenings. She watched Mira read correspondence at the library table. She watched the way Aldrich's head turned when Mira came into a room, and the way he corrected it back to the middle distance when anyone else was present. On the morning of the third week, she intercepted Mira in the corridor outside the estate office. "I have watched that boy," Lady Orrin said without preamble, "for 30 years. He has not laughed since Owen died. I heard him laugh last Tuesday. It came from the library, and you were reading him something about surveying errors, which tells me that the capacity for amusement was always in him and only needed the right kind of company." She paused. "You are not what I was expecting," she added. "What were you expecting?" A woman frightened enough to be managed. She turned and walked away, her heels making small, precise sounds on the stone floor, and Mira stood in the corridor with her hand pressed against her sternum without having chosen to put it there. Cecily Rathmore arrived on a wet afternoon in a carriage with gilt trim and two ladies who did not speak and a solicitor who spoke too much. She was beautiful in a way that was clearly intentional, copper-haired and green-eyed, and she moved through the entrance hall of Dunmore House with the proprietary ease of a woman who had been practicing this walk in her imagination for some time. At dinner that evening, Cecily sat at Aldrich's right. She moved his water glass 2 inches to the left. She rearranged the candelabra. She knocked her napkin from her lap and watched his face when it fell. He reached for the glass in the wrong place, corrected. He did not look at the napkin. Cecily's expression, watching this, was the expression of a woman running down a list and checking items off. Then she turned to Mira with a smile that had nothing warm in it. "How resourceful of his lordship," she said, her voice carrying the length of the table, "to find himself a useful little tradesperson to manage the household correspondence." She tilted her head. "Tell me, Lady Dunmore, does the ink come off, or is it a permanent feature?" The table went silent. Lady Orrin at the far end set down her fork. The housekeeper, standing by the sideboard, fixed her gaze on the wall. Mira felt the words land, felt the specific quality of them, not the vulgarity alone, but the intention, the performance of it, the way Cecily had timed it for the middle of dinner, when there were witnesses and no graceful exit. She felt it the way she had felt her father-in-law's creditors, the way she had felt the solicitor's clerk, who had not looked at her when he handed her the envelope. The calculation of people who had measured her and found a number they were comfortable dismissing. She let the silence sit for 2 seconds. Then she said, "The ink is a professional mark, Lady Rathmore. I earned it." She lifted her wine glass without hurry. Some women earn their marks differently. Lady Orrin made a sound that might, in other lighting, have been a laugh. But the damage had been assessed and filed and noted. And that night, after the guests had gone to their rooms and the house had settled into silence, Mira locked her door and sat on the floor with her back against the bed and let herself be angry, properly and privately, in a way she had not permitted during dinner. She was angry at Thomas, who had been dead for 14 months and was still managing to arrange her circumstances. She was angry at Cecily, who had aimed precisely and not missed. She was angry at the specific, relentless exhaustion of being a woman in a room where men decided your price and women announced it, and at the way no one at that table had said a word, and at the way she had known they wouldn't, and had sat straight anyway, because sitting straight was all she had ever been able to entirely control. She was still sitting there when the knock came. 2 quiet taps. She stood and opened the door. Aldrich stood in the corridor without his cane. His eyes were clear and direct, and carrying something that looked very much like anger, and it was not directed at her. "May I come in?" She stepped aside. He stood at the window. The grounds below were dark and rain-wet, and he looked at them for a long time without speaking. When he turned, the mask was gone, not just the injury performance, but the other one as well, the managed, controlled public face. What remained was tired and direct and honest. "I could not stop it without showing her. The cane was a pretense," he said, "and if she knows the pretense is finished, she will not wait. She will find a way to move the evidence before we are ready. I know." She sat deliberately from behind a position of power and aimed at the seam most likely to come apart. He paused. "She has done it before," to Owen. Mira looked at him. "What do you mean?" He crossed to the chair by the desk and sat, and was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Owen found the forged lease 3 weeks before he died. He came to me with it. I told him to be careful, that whoever had produced it would not want it examined." Owen said he understood. He was careful, or he tried to be. He was 24, and careful enough for a man who did not yet know what careful needed to mean when the stakes were that particular. He stopped. His hands were on his knees, and Mira could see the effort of steadiness in them. "He came to me 2 days before he died. He was going to take the document to a solicitor in the morning. He had told me this, and then he had gone to have dinner at the Rathmore estate, because Cecily had invited him, and he did not want to be rude, and Owen had never been able to be rude to anyone in his life, even people who deserved it. He died that night on the road home. The axle of his carriage broke on a stretch of road he had travelled 50 times without incident. The document was gone from the estate office by the time I went looking. He looked at the floor. Owen was the kind of person, he said, who made rooms easier. He had a faculty for, he paused, gathering the word from somewhere it had been stored for a long time, lightness. He was not careless, but he was light in a way I never managed to be, and he followed me and looked after me in the way that younger siblings sometimes do when their elder is inclined to take things too seriously. And I took his following for granted in the way that people take such things for granted when they have always had them. His voice, when it broke on the next word, broke very quietly. He was 24. He had not yet done most of what he intended to do. He had talked about travelling, about standing for a seat in Parliament, he stopped. About a woman in the village he was considering asking to marry him. He had told me this the week before he died, and I had told him to think carefully, and he had said, very cheerfully, that he always thought carefully, and I had laughed. And that was the last time I remember laughing. The room was entirely still. I have been using the cane for 18 months because Cecily Rathmore believes I am diminished, and a diminished man is a man she can manage rather than eliminate. And as long as she believes she can manage me, she stays, and as long as she stays, she can be caught. But I needed her to believe there was something she could legally claim. I needed her to present the forgery publicly, in front of witnesses, in conditions that could not afterward be disputed. He looked at Mira directly. "The Harwick Winter Assembly," he said. 12 days from now, every family of consequence in the county will be there. Cecily will be there because she cannot resist a room in which she might win something. And you will be there, and you will know what to look for in the document she brings, in a way that no one else in that room will. Mira thought of the document on the library table, the old-style longs, the mechanical kerning, the typeface she could identify in the dark. She thought of Owen Voss, 24 years old, going to dinner because he did not want to be rude. She crossed the room and took his hand. His fingers closed around hers, and the grip was not the careful, managed grip of a man performing a role. It was something less composed and more honest than that. "She will not walk away from that room," Mira said. "We will not let her." They worked through the night. Mira sat at the desk while Aldrich read documents aloud, and she wrote from memory, the lease terms she had read, the signature block as it had appeared in the solicitor's copy, the specific typographic peculiarities she had catalogued, the date and time and conditions under which the original deed had been filed. She wrote until the candle burned low and lit another, and kept writing. The Harwick Assembly met on the 3rd Saturday of January in the grand hall of Harwick House. 200 candles and the smell of pine boughs and beeswax and 200 voices. The Ashworths were there, the Draytons, the Penrose family, the Rennick cousins from the north, Lady Orrin in wine-coloured silk, seated near the front with a glass of something amber and eyes that took in the room like a map. Aldrich entered on Mira's arm. The cane tapped the polished floor. The room parted around them in the particular way. Rooms part for titled men with visible infirmities, with a combination of deference and the faintly avid attention of people watching something they believe might be interesting. Cecily Rathmore stood near the centre in emerald silk and watched them enter with the patience of a woman who had already decided how the evening would end. She moved first. She crossed the room with the confident unhurry of a woman who had rehearsed this, approached Aldrich, angled her body smoothly between him and Mira, and addressed the assembly host, Lord Harwick, directly. "I have a matter that requires the attention of this company," she said, and her voice reached every corner. She produced a folded document from her evening bag and held it up. A betrothal agreement between the Rathmore and Voss families, predating his lordship's recent marriage, signed by the Earl of Dunmore and witnessed by 2 members of this county. As the prior contract holder, I have a legal claim to the position this woman currently occupies. The room went quiet in the specific way of rooms in which 200 people are all simultaneously deciding whether to look at the document or at the faces. Lord Harwick took the document. Cecily turned to Mira with a smile that had not changed since dinner. "I am sorry, Lady Dunmore, but I'm afraid the law is quite clear on precedents." Every head in the room turned. Mira stepped forward. Her hands were steady. Her voice, when it came, was the voice she had used in the print shop. Clear, even, without performance. That document was not set in a solicitor's office. She did not raise it above a conversational pitch. She did not need to. The body text was set in Westerfield Old Roman, a typeface that has not been in common commercial use in this county for 15 years. It arrived in this county as part of a lot of salvage press equipment 3 years ago. I know this because I purchased that lot. I am the only compositor in this county who holds it. Murmurs moved through the room. The signature block was added by hand after the body was set. The spatial inconsistency between the mechanical kerning of the body text and the handwritten signature block is visible under ordinary lamplight. The particular error in the long. She heard Cecily begin to say something. She did not stop. In the 7th line of the Vuxa paragraph is the same error present in 3 documents that passed through my compositing shop in the past 2 years, all of which I can produce. They were ordered by a customer who provided her own copy text and collected the documents herself, without a delivery address. She turned and looked at Cecily. The customer's name was recorded in the shop ledger as C. Rathmore. The room did not breathe. Lady Orrin set down her glass. Lord Harwick was looking at the document in his hands as if it had changed character while he was holding it. Cecily's smile was intact, but it had changed quality. Tighter, more deliberate, a thing being maintained by effort rather than ease. "The girl is a tradesperson playing at law," she said. "This is embarrassing." Aldrich set down his cane. He straightened to his full height. He turned to face Cecily Rathmore, and his eyes, when they found hers, did not wander to the left or fix on the middle distance, or perform any of the approximations he had maintained for 18 months. They found her face with complete and obvious precision. He looked at her the way a man looks when he's been watching someone for a long time and has finally decided to let them know it. "You arranged the death of my brother," he said. The words fell into the silence of the room like stones dropped into still water. One at a time, absolute, Cecily took a half step back. Her hand found the edge of a nearby table. "You arranged it," Aldrich continued, "because he found the lease you had forged in order to claim the mineral rights to the Northern Dunmore parcel, and because he was going to a solicitor in the morning, and because you could not permit that. You invited him to dinner. You arranged for the axle of his carriage to fail on the road home. And then you went to the estate office and took the document he had found, and you have spent the 18 months since constructing a claim to replace it with a legal one." The room was still. Someone near the back had put down a glass and had not picked it up again. His voice was not loud. It did not need to be. "You have spent 18 months, he said, believing I could not see what you were doing because you believed I could not see at all." He reached down and picked up the cane. He held it out to her, the way one returns an object that has served its purpose. She did not take it. Mira spoke into the following silence. Her voice was the last sound in the room. "Mr. Pruitt," she said, "is in the vestibule. He has been there since 8 o'clock. Cecily turned toward the door. She turned back. Her mouth opened and produced no sound. Mr. Pruitt entered from the vestibule with 2 officers of the county constabulary. The room opened for them in the particular way of crowds that have just decided which side they are on. Lord Harwick handed the forged document to the first officer without being asked. He handed it over with the expression of a man who is glad to have it out of his hands. Lady Orrin raised her glass in no particular direction and drank. Cecily Rathmore left the Harwick assembly between 2 constables at 9:43 in the evening. She did not speak. She kept her chin level. The doors closed behind her, and the sound they made was the sound of a room exhaling all at once. In the week that followed, the account settled itself into public record. The forged betrothal contract was submitted as evidence at the county court. The mineral rights lease was ruled fraudulent and the transfer voided. An inquest into the death of Owen Voss was opened at the request of the Lord Chancellor, based on new material witness testimony and a set of carriage maintenance records obtained from the coaching house at which Cecily Rathmore's servants had ordered the work done. Aldrich stood before the assembly in the minutes after the constables withdrew. In a room that was still vibrating with the specific stunned silence of 200 people who had each just realized they had believed something that was not true. "My wife," he said, and his voice carried without effort to the corners of the room. "The Countess of Dunmore is the most precise mind I have encountered in my life, and every word she spoke tonight is the truth." He paused. "I see her perfectly." Colonel Rennick began to clap. It spread the way such things spread in rooms where relief is looking for a shape to take. Lady Orrin lifted her glass again, this time in a direction that was clearly intentional, and the expression on her face was the expression of a woman who had been right and had known she was right and had been waiting with moderate patience for everyone else to come to the same conclusion. Blythe, the housemaid, who had come to the assembly with the household party and had been standing near the service entrance since 8 o'clock in her good dress, was crying silently and without apparent embarrassment. Mira stood in the middle of the noise and let it move around her. She did not weep, she did not raise her voice, but she found Aldrich's hand, and he took it, and held it without any performance at all. The carriage back to Dunmore House was dark and quiet, and smelled of rain coming in through the gap in the window seal. They sat across from each other, the lamp swung gently on its hook. Neither of them spoke for a long time, and the silence was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people who have just done a difficult thing together, and are still feeling the weight of it go out of them. Then Aldrich leaned forward. He took her hand, deliberately, without the managed precision of the past months, with the directness of a man who could see her and was choosing, plainly, to reach. "I chose you," he said, "because you were the only person who could do what needed doing. That is true, and I will not pretend otherwise." She waited. "I am asking you something different now." He turned her hand in both of his, and his voice, stripped of every formal register, was quiet and direct and something she had not heard from him before. To stay, not for Owen, not for the estate or the evidence or any of it, for me, because I have spent 18 months in a house where no one knew I could see them, and the only evenings I have been able to breathe freely are the ones you were in the room. Mira looked at him, at the lamplight on his face, at the hands holding hers. She said, "You placed that ring on the correct finger in a chapel where you were allegedly unable to see 3 inches past your own face. I noticed it before we had finished the ceremony. I have been deciding whether to trust you since then." He said nothing. She said, "I decided some time ago." He pressed his forehead to her hand and closed his eyes, and for the first time in 18 months, the dark behind his eyes was a choice he had made freely, and not a role he was playing, and the carriage carried them home through the winter rain. A year and a half later, Dunmore House was different in the way that houses become different when the people in them are no longer performing something. The doors between the east and west wings stood open. Mira's compositing desk, brought from Cordwainer Street at Aldrich's request, ink-stained and irreplaceable, sat in the library beside the estate writing table. Their correspondence mingled on the surface, her type specimen sheets next to his land surveys. Fenn, who had served the Voss family for 30 years and been observed to smile exactly once in that period, had been observed to smile twice in the past month, and was understood by the household to be on a trajectory. In the south garden, Aldrich sat on the stone bench near the rose arbour with a child in the crook of his arm, 7 months old, fair-haired like her uncle, with her mother's deliberate, assessing gaze. He was describing the garden to her in the low, unhurried voice he used when he was not performing anything, pointing out the shape of the yew hedge, the particular way the January light came through the bare apple branches, the small brown bird on the gatepost who was watching them both with an air of professional scepticism. Mira watched from the library window, with her hand pressed flat against the glass. Lady Orrin arrived at noon on Thursdays with shortbread and opinions, and she kissed the child and critiqued the arrangement of the library shelves, and sat beside Aldrich on the bench with the air of a woman who had always known things would work out, and had simply been waiting for the other parties to catch up. "She has Owen's brow," Lady Orrin said one Thursday, looking at the child in Aldrich's arms. Aldrich's hand stilled on his daughter's back. Then he said, "Yes," and his voice was even, and the grief was there, but it was no longer the kind of grief that collapses a man. It was the kind that has been carried until it becomes part of the weight a person knows how to bear. That afternoon, a letter arrived from Mr. Pruitt. Mira opened it at the compositing's desk. The inquest into Owen's death had produced a secondary finding. In the records of the coaching house where the carriage work had been arranged, a second name appeared on the order. Not Cecily Rathmore's. A name Mr. Pruitt had not previously encountered. Someone had paid for the work. Someone who was not Cecily had done the paying. Mr. Pruitt enclosed a note marked for the Countess's eyes only. He had found this second name in 2 other places, once in a land registry document, once in a letter filed in the Rathmore estate papers by the county court. He believed the Countess would recognise the typographic style of the letter. He believed she would know who had set it. Mira read the note twice. She looked up through the library window at Aldrich in the garden, his daughter in his arms, the small bird on the gatepost watching them both. He looked up. His eyes found hers across the garden with the same directness they always did now, clear, unhesitating, unconcerned with the distance. Mira picked up her pen. There was more work to do.